You're listening to From Heaven and Hope, a weekly podcast where Nicole Frazier brings you conversations from those who have been affected by grief. Whether a parent, child, friend, counselor, pastor, or philanthropist, everyone moves through and conquers grief in their own way. We know that what you're facing is a long road, but no matter how dark that road is, there will always be light. There will always be purpose. From where they are in heaven to the hope you need to move forward, we want to help you on that journey. Here is today's episode.
So today I am thrilled to have Elizabeth Walen on the podcast. She's a mother, blogger, and wellness advocate who has a layered story of grief. Both of her husband's parents passed away with very little notice, and while grieving herself, had to navigate supporting her husband and children through it all. She's got some practical tips for anyone navigating this same road, so here she is. Hey, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. So anybody listening at home, Elizabeth and I met through the blogging world a few years ago and have stayed connected through our love of natural wellness. But Elizabeth has a story, personal experience with grief. So Elizabeth, why don't you share a little bit about yourself, your experience, and why you're here today?
Okay. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina with my husband, and we have 2 kids. We have a 5-year-old little girl, Madeline, and a 2-year-old little boy, Connor. And my personal experience with grief started about 6 years ago. At that time, we had never experienced a grief of someone like in our immediate family. And our world turned upside down in one day when my husband learned that his father had a glioblastoma, which is just the most deadly and aggressive form of a brain tumor. It was located in his brain stem, which is the worst place for it to be. And he passed away within 8 weeks of the diagnosis. And then a couple years later, we also lost his mom to cancer. So we've navigated grief as a young couple, with him losing both of his parents.
Yeah. So how did, I imagine you guys have been together for a long time. How did you manage your own grief while also supporting Corey's grief and your kids?
I don't know that this is the best advice, but this is what I did. It was kind of a triage system for who needs to be taken care of the most. And it was not me in the early days. I was very close with his family. We were together a long time before this happened. So I did have my own grief. It changed my day-to-day, especially losing his mom because she lived in Charlotte, just 10 minutes from us. She saw my kids, twice a week, every week. But I just had to address everyone else's needs first. As a mom, you are used to managing your own household. And then you just naturally take care of other people first. I remember the moment I found out, just feeling so much intense pain because I could feel my grief and everyone else's grief in my house.
Right. That's awful. Did you sacrifice some of your day-to-day needs to support them? How did you manage that as well as not overwhelming yourself, Yeah,
I sacrificed my need for alone time and quiet time, which my little boy was 9 months old when my mother-in-law passed away, which for anyone who has 2 young kids, you need a few minutes of peace and quiet to yourself a day or even a week. And that just had to be put on the back burner, which, it created exhaustion. But I felt like it was just something that I had to do. I kind of dealt with me later, months down the road.
Yeah. How did you deal with your own feelings once you did?
We've both been to therapy, and for day-to-day managing my stress level and anxiety over this, we both do meditation. My husband especially loves the Calm app for just relaxing his feelings and kind of clearing his head to be able to relax.
Yeah.
I really love exercise just for that stress relief, and moving my body makes a world of difference, I feel like, with just feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you feel like you have to manage your fear about the disease, like of cancer itself, having it ripped through your family, or like for yourself, for your kids, for your future, or how do you manage that?
My husband and I both have just a great fear of disease with our kids and with him. This story actually started like 20 years ago when his father was diagnosed with leukemia, and he went through the bone marrow transplant when it was like an experimental trial. And then he was fine for over 20 years. And then his second cancer was not even related to that. So then when I go to the pediatrician and I have to check all the boxes, we check all the boxes, which creates a lot of anxiety for me about them getting sick. There's just a lot of unknown. Obviously working, I work with Beauty Counter, so working with wellness, we see the statistics often, but you don't really feel them until you've lived it. So now that I've seen it in my family, that, 1 out of every 2 men will get cancer, 1 out of every 3 women will get cancer. And then I look around the dinner table, it causes a lot of anxiety when I'm counting the people in my family and knowing one of them is going to get this at some point. Right. So just focusing on preventative wellness is pretty much all I can do. We switched to integrative doctors who focus a lot more on prevention and spend a lot more time with the patient. So we've done that for my husband and my kids, and then I'll probably eventually do that for myself.
Wow. Okay. That's actually great, like practical advice, like for managing your fear surrounding that.
The types of cancer that they've experienced are not genetically linked. However, that doesn't always give peace, though. Obviously, when you're at risk for a certain kind of cancer, you can be screened. But when you look at, we've had between them 3 different types now, it feels like an environmental, risk, which there's only so much you can do.
Yeah.
We use clean products in our home and on our bodies, and we try to eat a healthy diet and a clean diet. But it isn't like a helpless thing to think that one of them might get sick one day.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you feel like their passing has changed your marriage, like at all? Like, or are you just grateful for just being together?
I feel like it's made our marriage stronger because we don't sweat like the small stuff now. I mean, not that it's like not annoying sometimes when I see a dirty cup in the sink, and I could have just put it in the dishwasher, or dirty socks on the floor when he could have put them in the hamper right next to it. But having been through this and knowing like that's not a big deal.
Yeah.
A family member getting sick and your life completely changing is a big deal. That little things like that don't matter. It's not worth a big fight. We were married 7 years last year, and everyone always talks about the 7-year itch, and they're like, "Oh, you made it through the 7-year itch." But it's not even a thing when you've been through difficult times. Not to say that just the stress of losing family doesn't create its own, struggles within a relationship, and just both of us being tired and worn out. But it has just taught us that these little things are not worth arguing over.
Yeah, no, that's good. And Corey travels a lot for work, or at least you did pre-COVID. I don't know what your situation is now. How did you guys manage your respective grieving periods while you had to kind of manage your work at home and him traveling for work?
So, he's always traveled 3 or 4 days a week. That was just kind of our norm for him to leave on Monday and come back on Thursday or Friday. This started, way before his dad got sick. When we lost his father, he had a really supportive kind of work family that would, they stepped in and helped with things, which helped both of us for him to just not feel so, pulled and many directions. But the way the grief of each parent hit our family was different, and it hit a little bit harder with his mom just because it wasn't the first time. And so after he lost his mom, he really, really struggled with going away that many days and sleeping in a Courtyard Marriott and not seeing the kids, just, being alone with his own thoughts in a different space. And he questioned a lot, like, why am I doing this? It was hard for me because I had the kids and no help. And then he was worn out on the weekend. And a lot of times as the support person for someone going through grief, you want to tread really lightly when they have time to relax and let them, be with their thoughts and recharge. So he, this is right before COVID, which we haven't, even really shared it with like the blog or on Instagram or anything, because everyone works from home right now. But in February, right before COVID hit, so a year ago, he left his job where he traveled so much, and he started a firm with a former colleague. And so he'll be at home all the time in the future. And the motivation to do that just came from, losing both parents. Life is short. He did not want to leave our kids every day forever. So it gave us some new perspective on that. Like, it's not always worth, being away from your family for a paycheck.
Yeah, no, that's great. I didn't realize that. That's great for him too. And great for you and the kids. When Corey's dad passed away, you hadn't had Madeline yet, right?
No.
Yeah. So how did Corey and you come to terms with her and Connor not getting to meet him, at least on this side of heaven? And then how did you explain the passing of Corey's mom to your kids, having known her?
Yes. So losing both parents, it was hard in different ways in terms of our kids. We found out that we were pregnant with Madeline about 6 weeks after his dad passed away. And his dad wanted grandchildren so badly. He, after we'd been married a couple years, he would constantly joke and give these like not very subtle hints about it, that he was ready. He really looked forward to that phase of his life. So it was very bittersweet to find out so soon after that we were pregnant, but it really just felt like you could see God's hand in the timing. We knew it was going to be, something that would heal our hearts. It was so good for his mom. Within like 10 months of her being born, she had sold her house and moved like 10 minutes away from us. And she spent a day or two a week helping me and spending time with Madeline. So I feel like we had a little bit of peace over that, just because you could really, we knew that he would never get to meet her, and he would have loved her and been so obsessed with her, but we could really see, God's hand in it all, which gave us, that sense of peace. But we did not feel that with losing his mom.
Yeah.
Her situation was a little bit different, where she hadn't had any severe symptoms. She'd been to the doctor because she was a little bit short of breath. And then it didn't get better over, just like a month. And Corey took her to the hospital, and they found out that she had cancer and was in multiple organ failure. And she passed away within 5 days. So we didn't have, much time to think about it.
Oh my gosh.
And then there just wasn't that peace. There was a lot of, asking like, why did this happen? She passed away on my dad's birthday, which is also my parents' anniversary. So in our house forever, it's always been like a very happy, joyous day. And then having to sit Madeline down, and they were just so incredibly close, but having to sit her down on that day and tell her, what had happened, and that her nanny that she loved so much went to heaven. That's like a moment that I'll never ever forget and never be able to stop seeing. One thing about grief and loss is that some of those moments get gentler over time, but that's one that will not
just burned into your memory.
Yeah. One slight blessing in, when we told her is about a year before my mother-in-law's dog passed away. He was very old. But Madeline loved him. She loved playing with him. He loved her. But she kind of understood the permanence of loss and death, which is sometimes hard for kids to grasp, that it really, like, you can't change it. And I think that kind of helped with a more significant loss, just because when we told her that her nanny went to heaven the night before, she really understood that she was not going to come back. Mm-hmm. It gave her like a little frame of reference. But it's still like, it's hard, and kids are resilient, but it's still, it's a significant loss for them too.
Yeah.
And it's hard for me and Corey to see Connor and know that he's not going to know either one of them. He was 9 months old when this happened. Mm-hmm. So he has no memory. And there's only, a handful of pictures even. Mm-hmm. And, he looks the same in all of them. He's a baby. It's just, it's hard to know that he won't have the same memories as Madeline.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's tough. And that's a tough thing to reconcile, I imagine too, right? Like, 'cause it's managing their grief, but in a completely different way, because they're just little. Can't really understand what that emotion means or how that feels. So
yeah. With kids, I feel like the way they handle it is different from us. Lots of tantrums. Even things that aren't related, it's just their body's reaction to processing, these big feelings. Just something to keep in mind too, for any parents who might be listening who have kids that are experiencing grief, is that it doesn't always look the way you expect it to look.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Corey has a sister, right? Am I right on that? Yeah. So was there a lot of family time in there? Was there a lot of, like, with her, or just like, did they lean on each other?
They did. So the timing of this could not have been worse. She and her husband moved for 1 year for her to do an accelerated nursing program. And this happened in the middle of it, where, in programs like that are accelerated, you can't take, a semester off, or it puts you, 2 years behind. Mm-hmm. So yes, they did lean on each other, but more like through phone calls. And, once she graduated, she came for an extended, visit to help with things. But not as much as if it had been at a different time.
Right. And was there much to sort of, like, did everything fall on Corey and his sister to sort of manage, like, estates and stuff like that? And how did he kind of get through that part? Like, just the logistics and how did you two?
The logistics are so hard. And I think that's something that, even though he had lost his dad, he didn't even realize, because, that fell on his mom at that time, just how much paperwork there is, which seems so cruel when you're going through a time like this, to have to sort it out. But his sister did what she could from when she was away, and then flew in to help. And then Corey just finished doing paperwork like a couple months ago.
Wow.
And I feel that when you have lost a parent and you have to start closing down, their life, it kind of delays the grieving process, because you have to get through the paperwork. There's deadlines and lawyers to pay. And even just like realtors will send you letters in the mail about the house. And once, the records are public, and it's just all very cruel, the paperwork aspect of losing a loved one.
Yeah. Do you think maybe, is it, I don't know if this is the right word, but helpful in a way to sort of just move you past that first kind of, I don't know, month, 2 months, to sort of just focus on something?
I think it does help to give, a task to do, a reason you've got to, get up today, and you've got to check this off your list because it has to be done today. Mm-hmm. You definitely could just, stay in bed after something like this happens, but yes, with things you have to do on a deadline and little kids that have to be taken care of, you have to keep going.
Yeah. Yeah. which is hard, but perhaps a blessing too, in a way. Not one you would choose, but just forces you to
reminds you that there's a lot left in your life. And
yeah. Was there anything helpful that your friends or your family did while you both were grieving? Like, if anybody's trying to support somebody that might be going through it, what would you suggest? What would be your advice? Or if you were to support someone, what would you do now that you know?
I think first, just to listen. Everyone grieves differently, and it looks different every time. It looked different the way Corey grieved his dad, having like a little more time to process, process that it was going to happen. And then, his mom, which was a lot more sudden, and it looks different, between people. Grief is not necessarily linear. So just being present to listen, in the days immediate, and even maybe a couple weeks immediately following a loss, there's just such an outpouring of support. Everyone is offering, to bring dinner or to help with something. But then that kind of goes away after a couple weeks as they kind of go back to their regular life. But when it's you and your family that this has happened to, that it doesn't go back to normal after a couple weeks. Mm-hmm. So having friends who were there to listen, even just sending a text message, just, I'm thinking of you. You don't have to reply. But if you want to talk, I'm here, I'm available. I'd love to get coffee. Just letting that person that you love know you were there and present and available to listen. And kind of along with that, acknowledging how bad it is. I'm a glass half full, rose-colored glasses type person. But that does not help in situations like this. It's a lot more meaningful to just be like, this situation is the worst. It really sucks for you. And I'm so sorry. Mm-hmm. And being like, oh, at least they're not in pain anymore, or at least, they're with their spouse in heaven, or, even though we are faithful and we believe that they're there together, it doesn't help ease your heart, in those early days to put a bright spin on it. I think it's a lot better to just acknowledge, what's going on and that it really stinks. That same note, I think not ignoring the situation. Mm-hmm. Right after Corey's mom passed, one of his friends invited him to a happy hour to watch a football game. And Corey just looked at me and was like, what? Because at first it's nice that they thought of him, but to kind of brush over it to try to cheer you up doesn't actually work. I think it's better to just acknowledge the situation and not make it like an elephant in the room that you don't want to talk about, especially when you're talking about losing someone in your immediate family. Mm-hmm. And also to just act, saying, let me know if you need anything. It's so overwhelming to think about what you need. So to just do it is so helpful. When Corey received the news about his dad, my first, after the shock, my first order of business was to get his work schedule covered for him, to call his assistant and make sure he wasn't having to deal with that. And that he didn't have to ask me to help or ask someone to help, to just step in. Right after we found out about Corey's mom, I had a friend who said, I don't have to work today. I'm going to come over and bring you dinner. I'm going to give your kids their bath and put them to bed. And I really, really needed that, but I would not ask someone to do that. I just couldn't even wrap my head around, when someone says, let me know how I can help. I think people will politely decline if it's not helpful, but to just give an idea, something specific that you can do, even I'm running to Starbucks. Can I get you, a latte? Yeah. Or, I'm making spaghetti for dinner tonight. Can I bring you spaghetti specifically? Yeah. Can I pick your kids up from school? It is just so helpful. And I think we need all that, but just even the mental brain power to process what you need in those early days is so hard. So a specific, action was great. And I really remember the people who did that. And I've tried to do that myself for, others who have gone through hard times, to be, very specific and intentional to be helpful.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And that's a pretty common thread, I think, through everybody says that, like, just offer something specific, or just say you're going to do it, like, because they won't ask, or they won't know to ask. So yeah. Do you think you're like, we just got past Christmas. Do you think traditions have changed? Is there anything special you do to sort of acknowledge Corey's parents? How do you kind of move that into, do you celebrate their birthdays with your kids? And how do you kind of keep them there with you in those special moments?
We do always talk about them on their birthdays. We try to talk about them often, not just on a special day. We have like my mother-in-law and father-in-law's wedding album in our living room, and my daughter loves to look at that. We love to, look at pictures. Both kids have little photo albums of pictures with her and of the family. We don't do a special like celebration for them. We just try to incorporate them all the time still, especially knowing, my parents are older. Hopefully they'll be around a long time, but I still have to kind of acknowledge that they're probably not going to have grandkids through adulthood, or grandparents through adulthood. So just keeping the conversation open, about them, and letting my kids know that they're very loved. Especially Madeline has memories, but as she gets older, I worry that she's going to forget them. So she loves tea parties. She used to have a tea party for my mother-in-law like every Wednesday when she would come over. And it had been going on about a year before Corey asked my mother-in-law where the water was coming from, because she wasn't tall enough to reach the sink. So she'd clearly been filling up her little teapot in the toilet and drinking it. So when she has tea parties now that she's 5, we like to tell that story. And even though she doesn't really remember doing that, it kind of keeps that memory. My mother-in-law was a super neat freak. She would, if she would have hated to know that. Well, like, it was not a great surprise to realize you the water like weekly for a year. So, but just keep, talking to them about these like little everyday things, especially, my mother-in-law was like such an active, part of Madeline's, early days, and she would just do whatever Madeline said. So we have lots of fun stories about that, and like to look at pictures of them. Holidays are tough now. I'm an only child, and then Corey's sister and her husband, they moved in January to Oregon. And then we live in North Carolina, and then COVID hit. So we haven't even gotten to visit them since they moved, and they haven't been able to come, back to see us. So Christmas and Thanksgiving were very quiet this year. I love holidays. Christmas is just my favorite. I like to celebrate it the whole month long. So it was kind of sad this year to just not have a big celebration and not have our house full of people. It's an adjustment. I don't really know what our intention is going forward, but hopefully, we'll be able to start doing visits again and get some of that big family holiday back.
Yeah, and with regards to your parents, like you, they're still here, they're still healthy and with you. Do you, now that this has happened with Corey's parents, does it give you a more strong kind of pull to spend more time with them or incorporate their lives into Madeline and Connor's life even?
Yeah, they, and my parents only live about 45 minutes from me. So we like to spend time with them. They like to come over and play with her. My parents both work. They're not retired. And they're both in their 70s. So they don't have the same, option of coming over every Wednesday as my mother-in-law did. But having this happen, it does show me that, literally today your entire family, dynamic could change from what it was when you woke up this morning. So, we call and talk to them every day. We try to do as many visits as we can. I want them to have memories of my parents too.
Right. And when you were going through this or now, you mentioned therapy, but were there any other resources, quotes, podcasts, song lyrics, Bible verses, anything that you found helpful that someone might reach to if they were kind of in the throes of it?
Guided meditation is very helpful for us. I really like yoga. I feel like I do best as far as clearing my thoughts and really being able to focus when I've moved my body that day. We both really like the Calm app for at the end of the day, just clearing our mind. I don't think that quotes have been very helpful for us. I don't feel like, especially with Corey's mom, that we're too like the look on the bright, or see the light part of it yet. For like the children, there are 2 books I really recommend if anyone has a child that's grieving. A Hug from Heaven and The Invisible String were really good at just kind of putting, what happened into kids' terms and letting them know that even though their grandparents are in heaven, they didn't abandon them, that they, there's that, especially the book, The Invisible String, that there's that connection from them to the people we love, even when we can't see them or spend time with them. So that's 2 good resources for kids.
That's great. And how do you think things are going now? How do you think you've managed up until now? It's been, I think, almost a couple years since Corey's mom, at least. And then
it's been about a year and a half since she passed away. And I think we have like good days and bad. Grief is definitely not linear. And I think if you're supporting someone who's grieving, it's a helpful thing to remember is that sometimes it's, a step forward and 2 steps back. And then sometimes it'll get to 2 steps forward, but then 1 step back. So even though it may look like things are getting better or more back to normal, then it's not. That doesn't mean it'll be like that every single day. There are, some days where it just really hits you hard. We were driving maybe like a month ago in the car, and we were passing the hospital, and Madeline, and she's never said anything like this before, but she looked where there's a stoplight, and she's like, "Can we stop here, Mommy? I want to see if Nani is here." And that, it's such an innocent kid question to be like, let's just check and make sure that she, really went to heaven and she's not just like on vacation at the hospital.
Yeah.
But I don't, that is heartbreaking, like on fresh for me, to have to be like, she's not there. And then a lot of times raising kids, you want to ask your parents questions. We are like at the big school decision, time for Madeline. She's starting kindergarten next year. And we live in a city, so having to make the decision of, do you go to, the city public school, or do we, look for other options for her? That's a question you really want to ask, someone in your family who has been there and made those decisions before. And my parents have never, they lived, in a suburb in a good school district, and they never really had to make that choice. But Corey's parents did. And I would have really liked to ask them, how did they decide? It seems like such a big decision, and to not have, your own parents to ask about it has been hard. So, I think, it comes in waves, and on days like that, when you really need them, not just want them there, but you really need that, the support of them, or you need their wisdom. It's a fresh hurt. But over time, the good days get to be, more than the hard days.
And in those moments where you feel like you need them, what do you do? Like, what are the things that sort of move you out of that, so the sadness doesn't take over for, days on end?
Oh, that's a hard, that's a hard question. Ever since we lost my mother-in-law, even like the week it happened, we just had this commitment that we are going to chase joy in our family. And I feel like we've lived pretty true to that. Since then, it could certainly swallow you, especially losing, someone you love suddenly, where there's so many questions of like, how did no one, when you've been to the doctor many times, like, how did no one see this? I mean, that could keep you in bed for a year. But just that commitment that, especially with little kids in the home, that we're going to chase joy in their memory, and we're not going to, crawling into bed and being sad isn't doing anyone in our household any good. Especially like little kids, they don't understand that even in their own grief.
Yeah. That's great. So how do you find joy? Like you mentioned, exercise, just spending time with your kids. I don't know.
Yeah. Mostly the kids. I've got some new hobbies this year. I've taken up gardening. My mother-in-law used to come over and do like all my planters and my flower beds. She would do that as my Mother's Day gift every year. So it's been kind of fun to make that a hobby for our whole family. And then we can talk about her, while we do it. Everyone loves flowers. Madeline loves flowers and Connor loves them. And it gives us all something to do together and kind of a chore to keep you busy too.
Yeah.
And while that may not work for everyone, I think when you're going through grief is a really good time to find a new hobby.
Yeah, I would agree. Okay, so is there anything else you want to share? Anything else that you found valuable or that you think anybody could take away from this conversation if they're trying to move through grief or trying to support someone who's grieving?
I think just remembering that it isn't the same for everyone, and that grief is surprising sometimes. Even, a long time can pass and you feel like it's fine, and you can be surprised at what sets you off. And that it doesn't always look the way you might think. Sometimes it doesn't look like sad lying on the floor, but it looks like you're angry over nothing. And just knowing that you might surprise yourself, or that person you love might, surprise you by not reacting, in the way that you thought they would. That giving a lot of grace to yourself and to, whoever else in your home or your life is grieving is so important.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. This has been awesome. Where can everybody find you if they're listening, if they want to find more about you?
You can find me on Instagram at the Blush Magnolia blog or at blushmagnoliablog.com.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks so much for chatting with me today. So there you have it. Elizabeth Walen. I love her. I've followed her blog for so long, and I just feel very connected to her spirit. So I hope you did too. I hope you took away something from this conversation. She left a lot of tips, and I'm going to include all the links that she mentioned in her show notes. So go check those out if you're looking for them. Take care, everybody.